This week's episode of the Book of Boba Fett took a little bit of a detour from its usual storytelling, and I've got some thoughts about what we got. So let's talk about it. This is Boba's Bounty. Hey everybody, welcome to Boba's Bounty. I'm Todd, and this is the Black Squadron's weekly Book of Boba Fett recap show. So last week we got a little bit of a tease that we might see Din Djarin show up in this week's episode, and that tease was immediately confirmed in the very first minutes of the episode when Din Djarin did in fact return. This episode is titled The Return of the Mandalorian, and honestly, it felt a lot more like Season 3, Episode 1 of The Mandalorian, rather than Chapter 5 of the Book of Boba Fett. In this episode, we got to see a little bit of what Din has been up to since we last saw him in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. We see that he is out doing bounties, collecting information. He's able to track down the Mandalorians that originally brought him in, that we see in Season 1 of The Mandalorian. We see the Armor and Paz Vizsla are the only two remaining Mandalorians from his escape on Navarro, when a lot of Mandalorians ended up sacrificing themselves to save him and the child. We also get a lot of backstory information about the Night of a Thousand Tears, the Great Purge that the Mandalorians had. It was really cool seeing the connective tissue between the Clone Wars and Rebels, and seeing what we got in the Mandalorian and how all of that sort of that history of Mandalore is being told and continued in live action. I also really love the parallels between Din learning to use the Darksaber and Sabine learning to use the Darksaber in the Rebels. I think it's really cool, kind of even the same fight sequence and the same moves that they both had at the beginning of learning how to use the Darksaber. It's kind of clunky, sort of trying to be stronger than the saber. And in this case, the Armor telling Din Djarin that he needs to let the saber do the work rather than trying to use his own strength to use the Darksaber. Din eventually reveals that he did, in fact, remove his helmet, and because of the way that these Mandalorians follow, if you remove your helmet, you're no longer a Mandalorian. So he's immediately cast out and is basically left on his own again. So instead of having this family, this sense of community that he had with these Mandalorians, he's now again on his own and has to kind of figure out where he wants to go from here. So he ends up going to Tatooine. On Tatooine, he ends up meeting up with our old friend Peli Motto, who has told him that she has a replacement ship for him, a replacement Razor Crest, more or less. So we get to see her and her gang of droids. She's got pit droids. I did love that we get a BD droid this week. I've seen that from Jedi Fallen Order. It's not exactly BD1, but seeing that same model of droid I thought was really cool, and just another nice nod to other Star Wars content. Din's new ship, he thought that was a Razor Crest model ship, actually turns out to be an old N1 Naboo Starfighter, which this whole episode is really full of prequel love. You have the N1 Naboo Starfighter. They trick it out. They put a big engine in it, and then he goes to test it out, and he's flying through Mos Eisley, flying through Tatooine, and you see him fly through Beggar's Canyon and kind of along the same pod race course that Anakin is in Episode 1 in the Phantom Menace during the pod race scene. So it's kind of, again, cool to see those parallels between old Star Wars content and new Star Wars content. Overall, this episode is really well done. Everything from the directing by Bryce Dallas Howard to the cinematography to the action scenes that we got, everything is just really great. And overall, this episode is really one of the better episodes that we've gotten from the show this season. My only complaint, and this is honestly my biggest complaint, is that we don't see Boba Fett at all. Not a single minute of him in this episode, which for a show titled The Book of Boba Fett, not having Boba Fett kind of defeats the purpose. And again, this really feels more like an episode of The Mandalorian rather than an episode of Book of Boba Fett. For me, the biggest issue with this is we were finally starting to get into Boba's Mos Espa story, his crime lord story, that present day story. We had just wrapped up all the flashbacks, and we're really going to try and get into the meat of his own personal story. And I feel like having this episode kind of injected right in the middle of it takes away a little bit from this episode and that progress that we were getting on Boba's storyline. My biggest fear, and hopefully this won't be an issue, is that they're going to try and cram 3 episodes worth of content into these final 2 episodes, and it's going to be very fast paced on Boba's plot and storyline. So hopefully, we'll see how things shake out, but that is one of my bigger fears going into these final 2 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. If I had to rate this episode out of a 10, I would probably give it an 8.5 on the episode itself. Yeah, again, this episode is really beautiful. It's well done. It's shot very well. But because it feels more like an episode of The Mandalorian rather than an episode of The Book of Boba Fett, I would probably give it a 6.5 out of 10 in the greater scheme of the entire show, because it doesn't really do anything to advance Boba's narrative or Boba's story, rather fill in what Din's been up to and Din's story. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Boba's Bounty. If you enjoyed this show, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes of this show or our main podcast show that comes out on Wednesdays. Leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you wish we had seen Boba Fett this week? Let us know in the comments below. We love seeing your comments. And remember, the Force will be with you always.